Howdy folks, Rudrose here, and we have exciting new news to talk about today, and that is the release of the limit break mechanic, or at least the details of how it's going to work. I actually had a kind of end of set review of certain cards planned for today, and I had it filmed and everything, but figured this is more pressing and immediate, so we're going to cover that today, and the next week I'll release that other video so you can check that out there. So let's get into what limit breaks are, how they work. I will have a link to this article in the description below, just in case you haven't seen it. But let's jump into it. So one disclaimer I do want to get out of the way first. Remember, this is early, so you're going to see a bunch of different reactions from comments, your thoughts. Oh, I think this sounds strong, it sounds weak, whatever. Yes, but full disclosure, we know it's early. We've only seen a few cards with the actual limit break text. None of us have actually played with these. We don't know what other cards are coming out yet, so none of us can truly know until we get our hands on it, but it is fun to just talk about it and speculate, but just trying to head off people being like, well, none of us really know yet. Yes, I know. None of us really know, so this is just, we're having fun speculating. So let's have some fun. So, what is the limit break mechanic? As you can see, it is very easy to tell what a limit break card is, given this ornate styling along the name, as well as with this big LB in the corner, which presumably, well, yeah, they wouldn't be able to be EX burst because they're not in your deck, so let's get right into that. So if your card has a limit break, it cannot go in your main deck. There is a separate extra deck, or limit break deck is what they refer to it as, that you can have up to 8 cards in there. And if your card has limit break, it says right here on Zach, cards with LB cannot be included in your main deck. So you'll still have your main deck of 50 cards, then you'll have this extra deck, this limit break deck with up to 8 cards. And these cards exclusively live there. Now, how do you use them? So these cards are going to be face down. So it shows a little example here. So you've got 8 face down cards, right? If you wanted to pay for one of these cards, as you can see, all 3 of these are forwards. So let's say it's your main phase 1, a time you would normally be able to cast a forward. So you would take the card from the deck, you would turn it face up. So let's say you want to cast this Victoria. You would turn her face up. This essentially declare I'm going to cast Victoria. You have to pay her normal CP cost. So she costs 4 and she is ice. So you have to pay 4 CP with her. At least 1 must be ice. And then you have to pay the limit break cost, which is right here. So her limit break cost is 2. So in addition to the 4 CP, 1 being ice, you must also then, from your 8 face down cards, one of them you have now turned face up, which is Victoria, you must then turn 2 other cards face up, and that's essentially how you pay this limit break cost. So they show in the example here, you need to turn 2 of your cards face up. And then Victoria gets cast to the field, just as if she had come from your hand, although do remember she's not coming from your hand, so if there's a card that specifies like from your hand, they're not actually coming from the hand, they're just coming from out of the game, essentially a different zone. I don't know if they're gonna, if that will ever matter, but they're coming from the limit break deck. So then after that, you will have used Victoria, you'll have 2 limit break cards face up, so you'll have 5 face down cards left in the deck. And essentially, once a card has turned face up, it cannot become face down again, so you are limited by that. So you have a certain limit of how many times you can use this. So like, let's take a Victoria, for example. I've got 3 of her in my deck. So every time I use her, I essentially have to turn 3 cards face up from my 8. So I can only use her twice. After I've used her the second time, I won't be able to use the 3rd copy because she's not even going to be able to do it, because there's only going to be 2 face down cards left, and I can't both pay the 2 face down cost and use her yourself. So you can see there is some restriction, some limit, to how much you can use them, but that's that. If you didn't get all that from my explanation, I encourage you to read the article. It does a pretty good job of breaking it down how it works. There was some confusion over this line about 3 of the same type of card, and I think that made some people think like type like forward, but I assume what it means is you can have 3 Victoria, 3 Zach, 3 Ace, just like you would in your main deck. You can't have 4 copies of a Victoria in your limit break deck. Some other things to note about the limit break deck. They say if you plan to use card sleeves for your limit break deck, please be advised you must use a different set of sleeves other than the ones that your main deck is using. So if you're using blue-colored Dragon Shield for your main deck, then your limit break deck cannot be those same blue-colored Dragon Shield. It has to be very obvious that it is a different set and it's not part of the main deck. So these 8 cards are ready and available to you from the very start of the game. They're just hanging out there. You can access it at any time. There's no restriction on when you can access it. Yeah, you don't have to like search for these cards or find them. They're just always there. So turn 1, if you wanted to just jam out this Victoria, you absolutely could. Another thing they clarify, which is important, is that if a limit break character leaves the field, it will go to whatever zone it was supposed to go to, but then it returns back to the limit break deck face up. So, for example, if you have Victoria and someone plays Shantoto, technically it gets removed from the game, and then it's put back into the limit break deck face up. I think the only thing this will be relevant for is if they make a limit break card that says, when this card is put from the field to the break zone, draw a card. So technically, it will hit the break zone first. If someone were to break it, you would draw your card, and then it goes right back to the limit break deck. This does make something like bounce quite powerful. Normally, one of the downsides of bounce is that you're putting the card back in the person's hand so they can just replay it, or they can, pitch it for CP. But these limit break cards will not go back to your hand, so technically it would return to your hand as part of the bounce mechanic, and then it's immediately put back into the limit break deck, which I don't think anyone's even going to move it to their hand. They'll just move it straight to the limit break deck. So bounce would be quite good against that. Yeah. And then he kind of talks about the card abilities just a little bit, but so pretty much those are all the rules that govern and cover limit break cards. These are the 3 we currently have access to what they do. And yeah, so how good is this? How bad is it? No one really knows for sure, of course, because we haven't got to play it yet. So here's all the things we know are strong, right? As far as I can tell, there is no downside to this currently. These cards are free. They don't eat into your... And what I mean by free is they don't eat into your deck slots, right? It's not like suddenly you're playing 42 cards in your main deck and then these 8 cards are sitting there in space. You still have 50 cards in your main deck. You just get these 8 extra cards that are in there. They can't mix and mingle with your main deck, so there's just no reason to not have this extra deck of 8 cards. As far as the individual power level, Zac seems incredibly weak. You wouldn't play this card normally, a 3-cost 7k that does a single for 3,000 damage. That's not very strong. It's not even enough to ping Magissa. The ace is clearly very strong if you get there. It's 1,000 damage for every wind character you control, and then as he attacks, if you're in mono wind, he essentially says draw the top card of your deck. And the Victoria seems all right. It's 7k if they have a low hand size. And it's actually interesting. This kind of makes me want to talk about Ice too, because with this mechanic, I wonder how weak Ice discard is going to become, because now your opponent isn't ever truly on an empty hand, right? So beforehand, if you're playing Ice discard against someone, you've got their hand to 0 and they only have 2 backups. Normally, the highest cost card they could play is a 4-cost, right? Because they can tap their 2 backups, pitch the 1 card in hand they drew for turn to play the other one. And that was everything they have access to. But now they could play up to a 6-cost because they can tap the 2 backups, pitch both cards in hand they drew for turn to generate a total of 6 CP, then pull something out of the limit break deck. So that does, I think that could hurt Ice discard. Again, we'll have to see how strong a lot of these cards are, how much that comes up, but that's just something you're going to have to be aware of now. As far as I know, you can check your own face down cards at any time, which it says right here. I do not believe you can check your opponent's limit break deck. So if they've got all 8 sitting there face down, and let's say you don't know what deck they're on, you don't necessarily know what they have in there. So regardless of how good the individual cards are, the strength of this mechanic should be quite obvious, that you're not playing these cards from hand, whereas normally that affects your overall hand size, right? Let's say you have a single backup and you want to play this Zac. So normally, if this Zac was in your hand, you tap your 1 backup, you pitch a card to generate your extra 2 CP, and then you play the Zac from hand. You have gone down hand size by 2 because it's the card you pitched to pay for it, and then the Zac itself, so you have 2 less cards in hand. Whereas if he's coming from the side, you're only going down in hand size by 1. You're pitching the card to generate it, and then the Zac just comes from out of space. He comes from outer space, so that's keeping your hand size higher, which is kind of crazy. Even if you don't particularly like the limit break cards you have access to, there's just no downside to just having them there in your pile of 8 cards. You don't even have to use them. They can just sit there for the whole game. But it's just a potential threat that maybe your opponent now has to think about. I have to say, on the theme is quite bad compared to what a limit break is in the game. In the games, a limit break is a special ability that formally got its name in Final Fantasy VII. Like, they had these moves called desperation attacks in 6, but in 7 there is a full bar. So as you took damage, you would build up this bar, and when it got full, your character would release a very special ability, which was usually quite strong, and usually stronger than most of the other things you could do. Then the bar would empty out, and you had to build it back up again. So I am a bit disappointed theme-wise that it's not related to damage in any way. It's not related to taking damage. It's not relating to your characters getting built up. It's not tied to the characters specifically. It's not like, oh, this Zack got so hurt, and so he built it up, and wham, then he hit with this limit break. Or in Final Fantasy XIV, right? It's this big meter that gradually builds up over time and then is this super strong attack. And in all instances, a limit break is something reactive. It's that your enemy has hurt you so much they have pushed you to your limits, and now you are breaking that limit by unleashing Cloud's Omni Slash. You know, he can't just do that move at all times because that would be insanely overpowered. But when he gets pushed to his limit, he can break out the Omni Slash, which is so cool. So they definitely missed the theme here, as none of this is tied to damage. It is appropriate to Final Fantasy TCG, because what makes FFTCG unique is there's no moniker, right? That you can jam out an ace turn 1 if you wanted to. But it does kind of break the game, and so like it's appropriate in that sense that, yeah, you can play them anytime you want. That's appropriate to FFTCG, but it is not appropriate to the limit break mechanic from the games that, again, those were usually reactionary and they were about taking damage and building up a resource. So that part is definitely disappointing. I wish they had hit the theme better. So if you want a host of reactions and are on the NA Facebook page, you can see there's a whole lot of comments. A lot of folks seem to be just kind of curious to see how it's going to play out. You know, obviously I don't think anyone has a true idea of how it's going to be. I know some people are afraid it's going to be really strong and really unbalanced, which is possible. There's a really good comment here by Hunter Nance in this little thread. And they mention in Magic the Gathering, there's a mechanic called Companion. You know, Aaron mentions it here. And it was a similar thing that you just kind of had access to this free card when you needed it, and it was very overpowered, and I know they had to errata the mechanic and go with it a lot. I actually really like Hunter's here. He brings up a point that, you know, you kind of get 2 to 4/3 bonus cards every game you can use whenever you want, and you always have quote unquote in hand. Hidden information and not always having it are part of the appeal of card games, but these cards will just always be accessible. And I really like that point. You know, even though it can be frustrating when you don't see the cards you want, that does lead to the excitement of the game, right? When you're, oh man, I got a top deck Susano here. I have to top deck Light Lightning. I have to top deck Luso, whatever it is. And then you do it, and you're like, oh, yes, I got it. Or you don't get it, and then, oh man, I didn't get it. But to me, that kind of makes the game exciting and different. If you always have access to it, like, again, let's say this ace ends up being super strong, it's going to take away some of the excitement that, oh, I have to find the ace. I have to find the ace. Can he pull the ace? Instead of, well, of course he's got it. It's literally sitting there in his side, you know, his extra deck, his limit break deck, that he could just pull the ace at any time. So that is a bit of a concern for me, is I think it might cheapen the experience a little bit. And it definitely does seem a little gimmicky, but I guess we'll see. One thing I am a hair worried about, I kind of think it's past time for them to increase so like if you're playing at a competitive tournament, usually it's best of 1 Swiss, 30-minute timer for a round. Can we increase that to like 35, please? Maybe even 40, maybe 40. Like, I get it. We have to fit so many games in, and people don't want to be there all day, and I don't either. But the game itself has become so much more complicated with cast counts, you know, big Luso turns, constant dull freezing, end of turn triggers. Like, I think it's needed a boost forever. And now you're going to have 8 more physical cards that are face down that you're going to have people stopping to look and check. And, okay, hold on, what do I still have in here? Like, we might be due for a time bump, because I wouldn't mind an extra 5 minutes. Yeah, well, if my opponent's going to be sitting there and I have to sit there and hold on, what's in my limit break deck left? And again, it probably won't be too bad in Opus 22, because I don't think there's going to be a ton of these cards coming out, but as they print more and more and more, and you could have all kinds of different things in that deck, like, that could be a big thing. So that's an overview of the limit break mechanic. One thing I do want to praise them for, because I've been asking forever, like, you know, make the game more interesting, like, change it up. Just do more than just the when this enters the field, when this enters the field. Granted, all 3 of these effects are just when the card enters the field, but pulling them out of nowhere and they're always available is different. We don't have that before. You know, you still had to find and draw the card you wanted. So they are at least trying something different. How will it pan out in the long run? Only time is going to tell. Hopefully it doesn't completely break the game, and hopefully it's not the opposite either, that it's just like so worthless that no one uses it. I can't foresee that being the case, but let me know what you think in the comments below. What other cards would you like to see with limit breaks? What were you thinking the mechanic was going to be before it even came out? I definitely wasn't really expecting this. I thought it would be more tied to, like, you have a Zac on the field and then you can use the Zac from the limit break to access this, because I thought that would have been more thematic, but obviously we didn't get that. So let me know what you think. Appreciate you watching. Look forward to that and just wrap up next week. And until next time, take care.